So I think it's just important to lead with the facts, lead with the truth, articulate what's going on, why you're taking certain action, and how it's benefiting the American people.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the Framework Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Engel, president of Southeastern University, and joining me is our co-host, Michael Steiner, SCU Senior Vice President for Advancement and Innovation. And we're excited to introduce our guest on the show today. We have former United States Secretary of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, joining us. Again, this is the second time that Chad's joined us, and he currently serves as the America First Policy Institute's Executive Director, Chief Strategy Officer, and the Chair for the Center for Homeland Security and Immigration. Again, it's an honor to have you back on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
It's a whole different world from the last time we had this conversation, and I'm sure you're pretty busy with the transition in the Trump administration coming back into office. What have these last couple of months been like as you've navigated and are working in some of the aspects of the leadership handoff in D.C. and I'm sure you've all been preparing for this pivotal moment.
Well, we have. It's a little bit of a breath of fresh air, actually, to have an incoming administration, at least in my world and what I do, that care about the American people, want to protect our borders, want to protect Americans, want to deal with the cartels and deal with the fentanyl crisis, stop the illegal, invasion coming across that border on all of these different fronts. And they're serious about really tackling some of these big issues confronting the American people. For the last 4 years, obviously during the Biden-Harris regime, just hadn't seen that, right? And It's been status quo for 4 years, and it keeps getting worse and worse. And I think the American people, and I know I'm excited that I think we're going to see some real change come January 20th in the day and the days after that to get at what's going on that border, to get it back under control. So I actually expect a lot of different actions, a lot of different activity. And we've been talking with some of the team members. You got a lot of good folks on the incoming team. They know what they're doing. Yeah. They not only know the policy, but the operation. So I look forward to some pretty big things to occur.
What do you think are some of the big things that we're looking to get done in this first 100 days? It really sets the tone of the administration. What should we as the people be looking out for during this first 100 days?
Yeah, I think it's going to, particularly when we talk about border security, I think it's, we got to end catch and release. And so that means a couple of different things, right? That means restricting asylum to just ports of entry. I think that means a national emergency along the border. I think you've got to end the CHNV program, which is the parole program, the CBP One app. You got to restart border wall construction. You got to look at the cartels. Yeah. Do you designate them as a foreign terrorist organization? I think that's something that the incoming team is looking closely at.
Yeah.
I think there's a variety of things that can be done.
What would be the implications if they got that designation?
Well, it provides some enhanced enforcement mechanisms that otherwise aren't available to the United States government with that designation, which is why we use that designation for other terrorist groups across the world, is making sure, mainly from a financial standpoint, that you start to choke off their money supply. Yeah. And so it provides that. I think it's also just, it's a useful messaging tool, and it really sets the bar of what the United States government thinks about these groups. There's obviously more than just one or two of them that are operating there throughout the country of Mexico, and how serious we are on combating this violence. So I think it sends the right signal as well.
Now, President Biden's decision to extend temporary protected status for, what is it, about 1 million immigrants, kind of one of his final moves in office as he's leaving. What impacts will this have on Trump's new policies? What are the long-term consequences of that kind of action here in late stages?
Well, TPS, otherwise known as Temporary Protective Services, is a type of authority that's used by the department. I should say has been abused by the department over a number of years. And during the Trump administration, we tried to get hold of it, and we tried to go back to what does the statute say in the creation of this authority. And the statute is very clear. And in fact, it's the first word of the title, temporary. This status is supposed to be temporary in nature for certain very big catastrophic natural disasters and other things, right? And so when you look at countries like Sudan, right, middle of a civil war, perhaps that's valid. I think you can make a case for that. Unfortunately, what they also did during this last announcement was to give TPS to El Salvador, right? And they said, well, it's because they have heavy rainfall. And you're like, what?
Yeah,
Like
Right.
that makes no sense. And it's heavy rainfall that's still impacting recovery from a 2001 earthquake.
Right.
And so when you see an explanation like this, it defies reality.
Right.
It makes you say that they're not going by the letter of the law any longer. They're just making this up
Yeah.
because they want to shield individuals from immigration enforcement. And that's what they've done in this case.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very important to get back to the letter of the law. I think it makes it more difficult for the incoming Trump team to do that. But they'll sort their way through different TPS designations that will come up for them over the next, the first 9 or 10 months.
Yeah, heavy rainfall. I think that storm was called President Bukele, right? And I think those
Right.
those people running from that rain were the people he was trying to put in that in the prison like he needed to. It's a big deal. Lots of stuff happening across the board. Do you think the U.S. is really ready to handle all of the security demands that we need to come in there? Do we have the infrastructure in place for it?
Yeah, I think we do. Look, DHS, Department of Justice, and others, they know how to do this. They just haven't been doing that for the past 4 years, FBI included and others. And so when you get the right leadership into these agencies and departments, it makes all the difference in the world. And they can start setting out what are their priorities, and then the department can move pretty quickly to put a lot of this in place. It's not going to be fixed overnight, but I think there's a lot of action that can happen on day one or week one that starts to set the tone, and then you start seeing the dominoes start to fall.
Yeah. When you look at national security threats, what would you say would be the top 3 that President Trump's going to have to address immediately?
I think foreign terrorist organizations, right? And we can talk about whether that's a cartel, whether that's reconstituted ISIS, whether that's Al-Qaeda back in Afghanistan, a variety of fronts. I would just say FTOs, or foreign terrorist organizations writ large, I still think have to be at the top of that threat pyramid, and how they're able to influence operations here in the United States. Unfortunately, what we just saw over the holiday period in New Orleans. So I still think that has to be at the top of that list. I think getting control of that southern border is also going to be very important. We see a number of watch list hits continuing to come across that border and trying to understand who they are and what they're doing. Again, very, very important. And then I would say, again, not in any particular order, I would also say the Communist Party of China has to be up there long term on being a threat to the United States. They are very different than some of our other adversaries like Russia or Iran or even North Korea. They want to dominate the United States in a variety of different ways. So I think it's pretty important to understand that and take preventative measures accordingly.
I love it. And, a lot of these challenges and threats are even made worse by some of the new technologies that we're seeing emerge. A lot of people handle, President-elect made a statement about some of the drone situations we're dealing with. Is there anything you can comment on what's happening? What are we seeing? Is there stuff that we as Americans should be thinking about with all this new technology floating around?
I think that's an important point. Look, drone security and countering drones is really, I think, sort of the next challenge I think that the federal government's going to have. We saw the incident in New Jersey, but we also have a Super Bowl coming up.
Yeah.
And what happens when you have drones flying over a Super Bowl with that many individuals? And you can imagine the other soft targets that are out there. And unfortunately, in New Orleans, we saw an individual use their vehicle as that instrument. Well, drones are going to be, unfortunately, that next frontier. And getting a good sense of that now versus later, I think, is going to be really important.
Yeah, as you look at a lot of these changes that are going to be happening, how will the average American experience these changes? I mean, you're going to have executive orders. You're going to have hopefully some legislation that will come forth out of the Congress. But what are some tangible things that we're going to say, wow, yeah, this is really changing and it's going to affect us in a pretty significant way?
Well, I think a lot of it, some of it some of it on day one is you're going to read about it, right? But you may not feel it or physically see it, depending on where you are in the country, until maybe weeks later. I think if you restrict certain travel to the United States, I think if you stop catch and release, if you start removing individuals that perhaps are in your community, dangerous criminal aliens that are in your community, you're going to see all of that. And you're going to start to feel that. So I think it's important. But a lot of what Washington does, they can do it on day one, but the implications and how that looks to the American people may not be felt on day one. They may read about it. They may say, I agree with this.
Right.
But the results sometimes take days and weeks to follow.
Well, and I think that's such a big important thing for us to realize. There's so much that I feel like a lot of us who have, supported President Trump and are very excited about this administration. There's a high bar for this first 100 days, right? There's a high, maybe not a high bar, but a lot of expectations. It can sometimes feel difficult to have patience, right? And so how, what are some of the messaging? What are some of the things that we can do to help us realize, okay, just because we're not seeing it immediately doesn't mean that things aren't happening? What are some of the ways that even the president and his team is thinking about kind of combating that lack of
well, I think
patience?
it's on two. Yeah, I think it's on two fronts. Is what are the actions coming out of the administration? I think actions speak, words help, but actions are always better. So what are the actions, and then how is the president's team communicating those actions? Because I think the big jeopardy here is that the president comes into office on day one. He's got a big agenda. He's got a big mandate from the American people. But if it's not communicated in the right way, and the American people start to fall out of love with it, right? Or start to fall out of favor with it, does that jeopardize, continuing to move forward with that policy over the next several years? And so I think it's very important that the administration talks about why they're doing this, and that as conservatives and America First, that we help support that, that we talk about from our own voices about how this is good for the American people, because we know what's going to come from the left. We know what's going to come from the other side is they're going to paint this in a way that's not necessarily truthful and not advantageous to the administration, in the hopes that it will be reversed. So I think it's just important to lead with the facts, lead with the truth, articulate what's going on, why you're taking certain action, and how it's benefiting the American people. And I think that will win out.
Yeah. Well, Chad, grateful to have you on the show today, and grateful for your insight, and really grateful for your leadership and your service for our country. Thankful for the role that you serve at America First Policy Institute, continuing to drive great policy that our administration can utilize and impact this nation with. So, again, we're thankful for being with us today.
All right. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. If you want to stay up to date with Chad, you can follow him on Instagram at RealChadWolf and X at ChadFWolf. You can also check out everything new with the America First Policy Institute by going to americafirstpolicy.com. Make sure you sign up, get their alerts. Incredible organization doing great work in our country. And we will see you all next time on the Framework Leadership Podcast.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Framework Leadership. If you're watching on YouTube, now would be a great time to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button so you can get incredible leadership content right to your YouTube feed. You can also check us out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts every single week, Framework Leadership. And if you love great email newsletters, and I know I do, make sure you check out keningle.com and subscribe to the Framework Leadership newsletter. It's an incredible piece of content we put out every single week of amazing leadership resources right to your inbox. Make sure you check it out. You can also follow us on Instagram at Kent_Ingle, at Dr. Michael Steiner, on X at Kent Ingle, and on Facebook at Kent.Ingle. Stay up to date on all the incredible things happening on the podcast and at Southeastern University. We love you guys, and we love our followers and our subscribers. Thank you so much for listening to the Framework Leadership Podcast.